What you gonna do when the happy little games run wild on you? Hello everybody and welcome back for part 2 on the history of Fire Pro Wrestling. Now I know how much I've enjoyed this series for the past 30 years and have literally played every iteration of it since the very beginning. Even with my disabilities, I'm still able to get in there and lay the smackdown on anybody who challenges me. Speaking of the last 30 years, I am still playing against my nephew and still letting him know who's boss when it comes to this game. This photo was taken of us playing back in the day, but 30 seconds later he was throwing the controller across the room and having a hissy fit on the floor. Anyway, on to part 2. Next up on our list is a little scene game for the PC Engine Super CD system. Wrestling Universe Fire Pro Women was released in 1994 and it features fully licensed rosters with both All Japan Pro Wrestling and JWP Joshi Pro Wrestling. This game marks the first CD-ROM based Fire Pro title and is actually based on the Super Famicom engine as seen in the previous All Japan Pro Wrestling game. The roster has been doubled and so has the animation frames, which makes all the moves look even better. As you will notice from the very first time you boot the game up is the Red Book audio soundtrack, which, surprise surprise, sounds great. However, aside from the music and some nice digitized images of each wrestler, this is something that could have been totally done on a cartridge. It's a good little entry into the series and it does retain the Create a Wrestler mode. As usual, it plays great. By the way, it's a little known fact that professional wrestler Aja Kong modeled her look after meeting my wife for the first time. (1995) saw another Fire Pro game that featured the lovely ladies of Japanese wrestling, which was Super Fire Pro Wrestling Queen Special. Once again, this is fully licensed by All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling and ups the roster to 40 female grapplers. The graphics and animation have been given a significant boost and everything looks just a bit more realistic. The Create a Wrestler mode is included and there are even hidden bosses to face. Hey! 1995 brought what was thought to be the last Fire Pro game on the Super Famicom, which was Super Fire Pro Wrestling X. This featured an expanded roster of over 80 wrestlers and would introduce a large amount of balancing in the MMA style. This also introduced new features such as light heavyweights being able to run up the turnbuckle without having to stop and climb. You can now stand on the ring apron and propel yourself into the ring and perform a drop kick or cross body, for example. Location damage has been improved, which will see you target arms, legs, and the neck of your opponent, and they will show visible signs of pain on the part you are targeting. Unfortunately, development was rushed and there were several bugs and balancing issues when it came to the various characters. This would be rectified very, very soon. In 1996, Human Entertainment set out to right the wrongs when it came to their Super Fire Pro Wrestling X video game. Thanks to all the negative feedback from the fans when it came to the bugs and the balancing of the characters, they released Super Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium, which, in my opinion, is the greatest 16-bit wrestling game in existence. This game includes over 150 wrestlers, which was the most seen for any wrestling game at the time. It also included 100 new moves as well as a number of increased edit slots, which was also quite limited in the previous X game. Something else that was just a glimmer in all of our American eyeballs was the X-Band service. In Japan, this allowed other users to connect and play certain games online, and X Premium would be the first Fire Pro game to allow online play. Similar to most other games in the series, this game would receive an upgrade in the graphics and animation department, and as usual, they look great. The game was so popular that it even received an English translation patch done by my friend Sidra back in the day. He also co-wrote the WWF In Your House video game FAQ, which is available on GameFAQs.com for your viewing pleasure. However, looking back on it now, I would not recommend playing WWF In Your House. The game is absolutely horrendous, and I would rather have another case of crotch rot than have to go through that again. Also in 1996, Fire Pro made its first jump into 3D with the release of Fire Pro Wrestling Iron Slam 96 for the PlayStation. Now, even though the game is in 3D, the same isometric viewpoint is present, and looking at screenshots of the game, it looks pretty good for an early PlayStation title. The graphics are fairly colorful, but the animation is a bit strange. At times, the moves look pretty good and are fairly smooth when performed. Other times, when a character takes a pile driver for example, the animations are slow, clunky, and stiff. It's similar to the time when a Viagra got caught in my throat and I had a stiff neck for 9 hours. The fabulous roster of over 150 as found in X Premium has been downgraded to 12, which is to be expected considering the game is now in 3D. The controls are similar to the previous Fire Pro games, but thanks to the lackluster animation, it doesn't quite feel right. The game modes have also been stripped down with only a singles match available. It's a horrible entry into the series, but unfortunately, it's not the absolute worst. I'll get into that one much later. In 1996, the game would make the jump to the Sega Saturn with Pro Wrestling S 6 Men Scramble. This game returns to its excellent 2D sprite-based roots, abandoning the 3D aspect altogether. The main drawing power is the 6-man scramble, which allows 6 wrestlers to battle at once, making for some epic battle royals. Since you can now have a 3-on-3 tag team match, triple team moves have also been implemented. Along with the improved visuals, which are looking the best they ever have, comes the roster, which has been upgraded to around 160 wrestlers. There are around 40 specific bodies you can create that are not in the game, such as Harley Race, Rick Rude, Ted DiBiase, and the Destroyer. The number of moves available have also increased slightly. There is now a breathing system which will give the player the option to regain stamina, so another element of strategy has to be utilized. There is also a headlock and drag move for better placement on your opponent. For the longest time, this was considered the greatest Fire Pro game to ever come along.
Give up. Give up.
The Fire Pro brand would take a break for a few years, but in the meantime, Human dipped its toes back into the 3D well. All Japan Pro Wrestling King Soul was released for the PlayStation in 1999. Having taken a look at their previous 3D outing, Iron Slam 96, they've realized what worked and what didn't and attempted to rectify all the mistakes with this game. The presentation is outstanding, especially for an original PlayStation game. The graphics look fantastic and some of the models look eerily realistic. There are 25 wrestlers available, but 60 more that you can create in the edit mode. The edit mode is fantastic with extremely realistic versions of actual wrestlers such as the Big Boss Man, Undertaker, Sabu, Andre the Giant, and more. Having been a big fan of the Fire Pro series and saw what good reviews this was getting, I imported it back in the day when it came out, and it was well worth the $100 price tag. The game feels like you're watching an episode of All Japan Pro Wrestling, complete with ring entrances, authentic music, and commentary, which even included Giant Baba. Speaking of the entrances, they did a fantastic job, and it's so awesome to see Stan Hansen walking to the ring brandishing his bullwhip. The controls are a hybrid of Fire Pro Wrestling and Virtual Pro Wrestling by Aki, which I'm sure I will cover at some point. Similar to Fire Pro, each button represents a strength going from the weakest to the strongest. Depending on which directional input is used, it will determine what strike will be initiated. You can also initiate a grapple similar to Virtual Pro Wrestling, but after it's initiated, the wrestlers will lock up and the timing aspect from Fire Pro returns. One major addition to the game is the use of power balls, which range from 2 to 4 per wrestler. They are used in different situations throughout the match, allowing the wrestler to perform a signature move, or if you are severely damaged, you can use it to kick out of a pinfall. Similar to other Fire Pro games, specific limb damage has also been included, which weakens their attack strength. The moves have been motion captured perfectly, and it's quite possibly some of the best character models on the original PlayStation. The longer a match goes, the more fatigued a wrestler gets. It's incredibly realistic and is definitely one of my favorite 3D wrestlers on the system.
なだれ式逆に丸めていった。ロープに逃れます。キックを追っていきます。
Released just a few months after the fantastic King Soul comes Fire Pro G for the original PlayStation. This game reverts back to its sprite-based roots and also its unlicensed roots, as the All Japan license is nowhere to be found. The game is based on Men Scramble for the Saturn, but it adds numerous moves as well as upping the roster to almost 200 wrestlers. We even get separate American federations, including the WWC Federation, or WCW, which includes Goldberg, Ric Flair, Kevin Nash, and DDP, among others. As far as the WFW, or WWF, we get Stone Cold, Andre, the Road Warriors, Shawn Michaels, The Rock, Mankind, Goldust, and more. A new feature was added to the gameplay, which is the one-shot reversal ability, which a player can unleash a critical out of nowhere on certain close call conditions. Fighting Road, which was the story mode, returns, but it's nowhere near as dark as what was found in Fire Pro Special. This one uses quite a bit of humor throughout. The game is fantastic to play and is definitely one of my favorites on the PlayStation. This would be the swan song for the series, and soon after, the employees would be splintered out, with one forming a new company by the name of Spike.
1、2、
In the year 2000, we were treated to Fire Pro Wrestling for the WonderSwan. For those of you who don't know, the WonderSwan was a black and white handheld that was released only in Japan. The game is based on Super Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium, but with obviously monochrome graphics and an updated roster. The roster was absolutely huge with over 150 wrestlers. The edit mode from Premium also made it over into this version. The sprites are large and detailed and are well animated, but there is some flickering which I don't know if it's an emulation issue or not. The controls had to be reconfigured due to fewer buttons available on the WonderSwan. With that being said, the game still feels great and is Fire Pro through and through. The game could also be played online thanks to the WonderSwan's network capabilities. It's too bad a Fire Pro game this good couldn't have been done with the original Game Boy hardware. Speaking of the Game Boy, 2001 brought us the first color handheld release of Fire Pro Wrestling for the Game Boy Advance. This one was actually released here in the States, but there were some differences between this version and the Japanese release. The American version featured recolored grapplers to avoid any sort of copyright infringement. If you are playing this on an emulator, a color patch has been released that will restore them to their proper glory. The timing has also been made just a little bit easier. The game itself is based on Fire Pro Wrestling G and features everything you would expect from that title, including the much beloved Create a Wrestler mode. One new feature is the Audience Approval mode, which after each match the audience will rate you on how well the match was performed. You can even link this up and play head-to-head against a buddy. The gameplay is great, and it sure was awesome taking Fire Pro on a road trip back in the day. Also in 2001, we were treated to the release of Fire Pro Wrestling D for the Dreamcast. For the longest time, this was the biggest and best Fire Pro game to ever come along. The game sported over 300 wrestlers as well as over 100 new moves. The story mode was taken out, but a new mode will allow players to take on a set number of grapplers to unlock create parts and various belts. Even though the Dreamcast had network capabilities, online play was not available. However, the company did produce a number of DLC content, including 60 DLC moves, and also added a custom pack of edited wrestlers. The edit mode was also greatly improved upon and allowed for custom arenas and mats to be made with great precision using the Dreamcast mouse. The graphics look spectacular, with the resolution having been increased up to VGA. The game allows for 4-on-4 matches for a total of 8 wrestlers on the screen at once. Your traditional match types are still available, along with exploding death cage matches, regular cage matches, fluorescent light bulb matches, and the octagon with UFC rules. As was typical with other Fire Pro games in the series that were released in Japan, everything is in Japanese. Thankfully, there now exists an English translation patch which makes the game a whole lot easier to play. As I mentioned, this was one of the best Fire Pro games to ever come along and would hold that title for a number of years. Fire Pro Wrestling 2 was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2002. The Japanese version featured a management of ring mode, but it was taken out of the American version for some reason. A number of other things were apparently taken out, including the Octagon and Tournament mode. This mode allows you to create your own federation and book shows based upon the talent available. While the English version did take out this mode, it did up the edit slots to 77, whereas the Japanese release utilized only 42. It also added a few new moves, better submissions, and being able to edit women in the create mode. It also added more American wrestlers, upping the roster to just about 200. You'll even see some knockoff versions of famous characters such as Batman, Robin, Chuck Norris, Rocky Balboa, and Bruce Lee. Regardless of the missing content, it's still a fantastic game to play, especially for a little Fire Pro on the go. And that takes care of the history of Fire Pro Wrestling Part 2. Tune in next week as I take a look at the best Fire Pro game in the series and also the worst Fire Pro game ever. Be sure and check it out. Same Pat time, same Pat channel. Thanks everybody for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to leave me a like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. Thanks everybody for watching.